Hey there! So, wanted to talk to you a little bit while still working on part 3 of the world review and getting the full product out there. Thought I'd cut in and get an extra video done in July. So I was thinking about Wilds and just some other stuff about the game that I haven't talked about as much that I wanted to just kind of give my take on. Think about, some stuff that maybe the game is doing well, maybe it's not. And one thing that definitely comes to my mind, and Wilds is pointing in one particular direction that I think makes it one of the more fun endgame experiences, especially of the modern era of Monster Hunter. What head and shoulders over, especially base game Rise and base game World, Wilds does better is the variety of monsters that you have available and worthwhile to hunt at the optimum level. Because think about it for a second, right? If we're looking at just the 3 base games of the modern era, and we're approaching these games in terms of we want to be going after the optimal opponent, right? Base game World has basically just the Tempered Elders. So you have Teostra, Lunastra, Vol, Kushala, and Nergi. And then if you want to fight the monsters that are like actually kind of fun, it's Teostra, Vol, and Nergi, because Kushala is a bastard in that game, and Lunastra had just really crazy scaling in high rank. So you're going after those guys in Tempered Investigation so that you can get the best, I don't even remember what the rewards for back then, but for the really rudimentary weapon augments that you had access to in the base game of World. So you're fighting, like 3 Elder Dragons? And then by the time that Rise comes around and its title updates go through, what are you fighting to optimally get the best rewards for the charm farming? Again, optimally. It's really kind of just All-Mother. I remember that Teostra powder was another very valuable material, so maybe Teo, but really you're just kind of going after All-Mother. And that's really kind of like the bulk of it. And now we look into Wilds. We're 2 title updates deep. And if we're looking at stuff, specifically, I think we're looking at the higher tier of Ardean part drops. You have the 4 regional apexes. So you have Raydao, New Udra, Jindahad, and Uthduna. Then you have the flagship, Arkveld. So it's 5. Then you have Seregios, Mizutsune, and Lagiacrus in the title update monsters. You've got the final boss in Zoshia. And then also you have Gormagala. So what's that, like 9, 10 monsters who are going to give you the best rewards tables in the game? Again, that is specifically going around with Ardean, and I kind of want to talk about the actual rewards themselves, but again, kind of looking at it at a level without any kind of subjective feelings towards what you're actually getting. I think base game wise, Wilds crushes when it comes to the variety it provides for you to still have some degree of efficiency. And the cooler thing is, on top of that, right, what oftentimes happens is like, okay, yeah, you have all these monsters in the game and the fights are great, blah, 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 blah. But for the most part, you're just only really going for, say, your Tempered Elder Dragons or stuff like that, whatever your kind of top level equivalent is. So for the most part, all of your lower tiers and your mid tiers that you might really like, you'll fight them for fun every once in a while, or if they're in a worthwhile event quest. But again, if we're looking at it in terms of going at the best stuff in the game at an efficient rate, a lot of your bosses just kind of fall off to the wayside, pretty much completely. Wilds, no, that's not really the case. See, with the way that the investigations work, you actually want those mid-tier and those low tiers to be showing up along with your maximum level monsters. The developers were very wise, I believe, in that when you get an investigation that has like a tempered max level 8-star monster on it, so any of the 10 that have the best possible reward tier, if they stack another monster on there, and it can be a tier 1 or a tier 2, the appearance of that additional monster on the quest is not going to add tier 2 or tier 1 rewards into the pool. They are instead going to expand on the tier 3 rewards that you're getting. So it's not like if you add Balahara or Chotacabra or Gravios or Rathalos or Rathian or Gypsaros or anything like that into your quest, you're then going to be kind of diluting your reward pool with a bunch of stuff that you're not going to use. No, you're actually just stacking up your table with even more of the stuff that you already wanted, which I think was an incredibly smart move made by the developer, because at this point, the way it's set up, depending on how the investigation RNG rolls for you, effectively every single monster in the game, barring Guardian Arkveld because of his story locking, is on the table for you to fight with some degree of consistency, which is something that I don't really think any other Monster Hunter game has ever been able to do successfully at an end-level optimization kind of perspective of looking at it. The only thing that I think gets kind of close is if you're looking at something like the Anomaly Investigations and Sunbreak, and they might get some of the extra temperance into those super max level anomaly quests. But even then, they're usually not really adding in the lows and the mids in there. If you're getting like the top level of Anomaly Investigations, it's really kind of just stacking with a whole bunch of the absolute top level, highest echelon monsters. So you're going to get like 2 Elder Dragons in there, maybe a rare species in there, and then, I don't know, something like a Flaming Espinas or something along those lines. But no, Wilds is basically kind of just putting everything on the table for you. I think the only thing that kind of sort of maybe gets the shaft here would be Zoshia, and that's only because you're not going to get another monster on that arena to pad out his reward table even more. So they kind of compensated for the fact that he's typically going to have a pretty decent amount of drops all by himself. And what I will say is, I think as much as there are some additional issues with the whole introduction of RNG into how Monster Hunter's reward system works and how that can be not fun, especially kind of at a top speedrun level. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I think that to some extent, though this could also be mitigated, one of the advantages of the fact that Monster Hunter is progressively using a little bit more and a little bit more RNG in its top level reward pools is that having some non-specific monster gear acquisition kind of allows you to broaden your amount of monsters that you actually want to go after, because you want to be going after more than just individual parts. I think that that's a strength of having systems like this. Though I'm also gonna suggest some ways that we can maybe also maneuver around this type of thing so that we can kind of keep this strength but also lessen some of the RNG dependencies. Especially, I think I want to talk about Ardean weapons, and this is gonna evolve into talking about them just a tiny bit. The other nice thing about Wilds is that in part it adopts the VAT reward system that I've talked about that I really enjoy with Sunbreak, and that comes down to the material farming for the ores that you use for, again, the Ardean weapons, but also for the materials that you use to get better armor spheres, as armor spheres are particularly scarce in this game. And the way that you get them is you go to the Everforge, you find that one NPC where you deposit a bunch of materials into, and very much like the charm system and the augmenting system that you have in Sunbreak, basically what you do is you just take your monster excess parts, so all your extra bonus stacks of stuff that are just kind of burning a hole in your equipment box, and you just dump all of that stuff into a vat, and it coughs up other more useful rewards for you. So again, you have some incentive to just be fighting whatever. The top level monsters are going to give you the more expensive parts, but if, you know, a dozen Chotacabra get caught up in the crosshairs because you're doing a bunch of Raidao farming or Soregios farming or Arkveld farming out in the plains or whatever, and then you just have a stack in the triple digits of Chotacabra parts, Balahara parts, Doshiguma parts, etc., well, then you just have some extra stuff that you can plop into the vat and you can get those extra rewards out of. So looking at it like that, just what you're actually chasing in this game, what you're chasing at kind of an optimized level, all that kind of stuff, I think the developers did a great job of giving you a ton of monsters that give you those top level rewards. There are monsters on every map that gives you that top level rewards. Thankfully, the Cliffs has Gormagala on it, because otherwise you'd only have Jindahad, and that would exclude the Cliffs from a whole bunch of this praise. And then if you add those secondary monsters into the quest rewards, then they're actually going to pad out the tier 3 rewards instead of adding their own stuff. So right off the bat, basically every single monster in this game is on the menu to be fought and still be operating at some degree of higher level efficiency when you are pursuing the best materials in the game. So let's actually kind of talk about the fact that this kind of comes off of predominantly going for RNG rewards, right? Because that's been a point of exasperation, I think, especially if you're a speedrunner. And, you know, I've talked about this before, and I've talked about it when going over World, is I 1000% agree that all these RNG systems are not great for speedrunning. They're mildly exasperating. I do think that Wilds has gone to great leaps and bounds to mitigate that level of exasperation compared to, say, World, especially with its decorations. RNG decorations have gone from one of the worst aspects of World to a negligible aspect of consideration with Wilds, and at the very, very worst, a mild inconvenience where you're going to be getting what you want particularly quickly. I don't even really know life this game, and I think I might be out of unique decorations that I don't have in my possession at this point. And the other thing comes down to the fact that we just, I think generally speaking, are not really a fan of Ardean. Because, you know, as nice as the layered weapon addition is, and, you know, that's great because now the weapons can actually look like what we want them to look like, there is that thing of like, well, I want to be hunting monsters for their gear and then turning the monsters into swords and shields and lances and bowguns and whatnot and using those. Realistically speaking, you're doing the exact same thing if the monster weapons were the most viable option, because again, you're hunting the monsters. But now on kind of like a semantic level, if you want to look at it a certain way, you're going from hunting monsters so that you can carve them up to turn their materials into fresh weapons and armor to you're effectively farming reward pools. You're doing the exact same thing, but there's just this kind of flavor text component to it that feels less satisfying than when you're actually pursuing monster-based weapons, right? And I am still hoping that they replace Ardeans with something else when the Master Rank Edition comes out. Or if they just take all of the monster weapons and give them one more upgrade tier so that they have some slightly augmented stats so that they can be near Ardean level. And they also have 3 slots on all their decorations and just kind of put them up at the same level. I know that a lot of work went into Ardeans, and the developers might not want to just kind of throw that away. At the same time, though, I think there is some level of dissatisfaction. So, you know, I praise the fact that there's all this variety in what you're hunting, but if that's really just for Ardean tables, is that satisfying? I think what the game could do is a few things, right? So you could do an extra level of upgrade materials for all of the monster weapons. That is on the table. And if we're doing that, it seems like Wilds is also moving in a direction where they're going to be making a lot of the rare parts and the part breaks a bit more scarce to incentivize more grinding. So that's a little tough to do with some of the stuff that wasn't introduced in the title updates. If they're going to continue with this rectification into Master Rank, well then, all right, you scrap the Ardean stuff and just make the monster weapons a little bit tougher to grind for. That's one way to go about it. So you're still doing the monster weapons and whatnot, but at the same time, you know, you're axing out the Ardean stuff and you're going back to monster weapons. What you can also do to have the monster weapons be valuable still, but also keep that component where you have a whole bunch of monsters that are operating on a similar reward table, I think you bring augments back. I really do. I'm betting they're trying to do something different. I think Sunbreak handled weapon augments particularly well because I just praised it. They predominantly used the material dump vat system with a couple of specific rewards on top of that. You know, you farm up a whole bunch of afflicted materials. They all have their different values and whatnot. And when you want to augment your weapons, you have a couple of specific materials that you need to dump things into. But for the most part, throw in whatever afflicted parts you want, so long as they they go to a maximum value. And that, I find, made the anomaly augmented system far better than the guiding lands augmented system, where it was nothing but specific parts, and every weapon of the same rarity had duplicate parts needed for the same kind of augment. So I think the best move that Wilds could do personally, especially at a master rank level, is axe the Ardian stuff. You make the material grinding for the monster weapons back to being kind of stingy. And then tempered monsters would probably have some in-game equivalent to the Spirit Vein Bones or the Spirit Vein Ores or something like that that you had for tempered guiding lands parts in Iceborne. So you'll still have your regional apexes. You will probably have Elder Dragons at that point, your Gore, your Arkveld, other flagship, other TU monsters that are all kind of at that maximum level in that shared pool of rewards, and you augment those reward pools if you add in the mid tiers in there. But now you're going for whatever your Spirit Vein equivalent is, and you're using that for an augment system as opposed to RNG Ardian weapons. And then as for decorations and the eventual talismans, honestly, the RNG is so generous in this game for the decorations. I'm assuming that's probably going to be the case for the talismans as well, that whatever, you can kind of keep those pools intact because you get stuff so fast and you get good stuff so readily and so quickly that I think that's going to be perfectly fine. So, shorter video today, but that's kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, is when it comes to how the mechanisms of Wilds work and what they incentivize you to do if you want to be getting the best stuff. I think Wilds crushes basically every other Monster Hunter game when it comes to wanting you to fight the largest variety of its roster. As I pointed out, it's basically the entire roster is up for grabs at this point. And hey, if they want to go crazy with it, because Sunbreak did, I'm getting the feeling that when we get into stuff like maybe the very, very end of the base game, or even probably into the master rank, I think we might be getting even crazier stuff where we're getting these hyper super level rewards pools on quests that have 3 or 4 monsters in them. And that's just going to be even more incentive to fight everything in the game. I believe that this is something that Monster Hunter has struggled with tremendously pretty much forever. Maybe not in every single game, but usually if you want to be fighting the lower and the mid tiers and all that kind of stuff, you do it because it's fun. And you know, I still do that stuff for fun. I fight the monsters that I want to fight the time that I want to fight them. I'll do practice runs on suboptimal monsters all the time just for the sake of it. But talking about what the mechanics of the game incentivize you to do, I think Wilds is better than every other game in the series. I think that's awesome because this is something I've seen the developers, I think, be wanting to do more and more and be moving more and more towards. I think it's an advantage that is brought along by having reward systems beyond just armor and just weapons. I know that kind of comes with caveats. I know that that can introduce some systems that are not the most fun for everybody, and there's still some tweakings and refinements that I think can be done to make this like perfect, but in this aspect of Monster Hunter, I think they're going in the right directions. I just think that augments with them having specific high-level materials that are shared between the top-level monsters is going to be the way to go to get this really satisfying and to kind of iron out the semantic issues that Ardian stuff provides that make farming for some of the weapons less satisfying in this game. So yeah, let me know down below what your thoughts are on all of this. I'll talk to you pretty soon. This has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons and special shout out to Stromlin, Skyryu, Sir Newt Newt, Shaggy Grizzly, Sam Richley, Psychotic Gesture, P-Berry, Nihilist Chimerax, Ketz, Datboy Doin Da Ding, Certified Rajang Hater, Sir SS Jacob, Pecco Plush, I Think I Stole Your Sandwich, and Call Sign Shadow. Thank you very much, everyone.